Now, the case of Saudi teenager Rahaf al-Qunun has raised fresh questions about what happens when Islam is criticised by its followers.
Yasmin Mohammed is a university educator, an activist and an author. She has a blog called Confessions of an Ex-Muslim. She spoke to us earlier from Canada about what some of the Muslim women experience in the story of Saudi teenager Rahaf al-Qunun.
It's unfortunately a very common story. When you leave Islam, especially in a country like Saudi Arabia that is under Shariah Law, the punishment for that is execution. So again, like she mentioned, it's not just in those countries, but around the world, people who leave Islam are in danger, especially women. Honor killings are unfortunately quite common, and Rahaf is one of thousands of girls and women, probably millions of women that would like to get out of the circumstances that they're in. And she is a success story. She made it. We unfortunately have been working with a lot of women who are not quite as lucky, but we're happy today.
I want to talk to you more about something you just mentioned, the honour killings and what's happening around the world in a moment. But first, can you tell us a little bit more about your story?
So I grew up in Canada, and I was forced into a marriage at a young age, and I wore niqab, which is the black covering of my entire face, wore gloves, the whole 9 yards. For me to leave that marriage, for me to take my daughter and to start a new life was very difficult. I was, of course, disowned by my family. I was also threatened with death. But I'm lucky that I'm living in a secular country, so I was able to start my life over again. Whereas somebody like Rahaf or somebody in any of the Muslim majority countries that follow the Sharia law that states that they should be executed for leaving the religion, that's just not an option for them. And it's especially dire for women in Saudi Arabia, where they have guardianship laws that literally restrict every single movement of a woman, so that she can't even leave the house without her guardian's permission. So these women are essentially living in a prison where they have a male guardian that determines, if she's going to leave the house for any reason, to go to school, to go to work. He has to give her permission to open a bank account, to even go to the doctor. In fact, she has to have her guardian's permission in order to go to the police to say that she's being abused, and quite often she's being abused by her guardian. So it's an insane, absolutely oppressive law that is making it impossible for women in those countries to live a happy, fulfilling life. And so somebody like Rahaf, who is, was able to get out, she's a success story, she's a hero, but there are millions and millions of girls behind her, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in Iran, where they're getting arrested for just removing the hijab, so the cloth, the fabric, basically. Removing a scarf off your head gets you 29 years in prison in Iran. Women in Pakistan and in Iraq are being killed for just posting pictures on Instagram that people deem to be too salacious or too provocative, and killed by their family members, or killed on the streets by random people. I could go on and on. There are just way too many stories of people that are fighting back in all of those countries, and they're just not getting through. So for Rahaf to get through is a huge, huge success story.
You've written extensively about the topics that you've just mentioned to us in your blog, through your work as a university educator as well, with a somewhat of a focus on what's happening in majority Muslim countries. But what about secular countries like yours in Canada, like Australia?
Yeah, unfortunately, these cases are not exclusive to Muslim majority countries. There are very similar circumstances happening in Australia, in the UK, in Canada. There was a 16-year-old girl here that was killed by her father because she removed the hijab. So being in a secular country protects you, of course. It's much better to be living here than it is to be living in a Muslim majority country, but that doesn't mean that the risk is completely gone. The risk is still there.
How does that sit in line with the laws of, in your instance, of Canada or here, the laws of Australia, that would seem to be completely at odds with those aspects of Shariah law that you've just mentioned?
Well, unfortunately, we have issues with cultural appropriation. So, for example, when I was 13 years old, I went to one of my teachers and I told him about how my mother's husband was beating me, and in incredibly brutal ways. And I described it and I showed the bruises, and it went to child services. The police were involved. It went to court. And in the end, the judge said, well, you're from a different culture and your family chooses to discipline you that way, so that's not my place to judge how they discipline you. So as a 13-year-old girl hearing that, you can just imagine that I felt like there was no hope, that there was nobody that was going to help me if a judge actually sanctioned this behavior by saying, well, sorry, your family happens to be Arab, so you're just going to have to put up with it. It made me feel like if I had been sitting there, blonde hair, blue-eyed, with a family from Sweden or Germany, that judge would have reacted differently. So in their earnest attempt to be, not racist and to be culturally sensitive, they end up overdoing it. So of course we want to be tolerant of all different people and all different religions and all different cultures, but there needs to be a stop sign. There needs to be a point where we say, okay, no, that crosses the line. That's abusive. That's against basic human rights. That's against our laws even. We turn a blind eye to things like even female genital mutilation. In the UK, there's one case of FGM every single hour, and not one single person has ever been prosecuted. That's completely unacceptable.
So this would seem to be a problem for the courts, for interpretations of what is contemporary culture. Is that far enough, or do laws need to be strengthened? Is there some other mechanism that needs to be put in place?
I don't know if the laws need to be strengthened. I think that the laws just need to be implemented, because in a lot of cases, again, I'm going to mention in the UK with the rape gangs that are just absolutely, all over the place over there, abhorrent situations where girls as young as 11 years old are in these rape gangs. That was allowed to progress for so many years because the officers and, in fact, the politicians involved were too afraid to be seen as being Islamophobic or as being racist, because the overwhelming majority of the men involved in these gang rapes were of Pakistani origin.